Hello there, guys, and welcome to Junior Golf Guys, our 5 top questions answered for parents video series. My name's Tom, I'm one of the co-founders, and I'm today with Phil, the other co-founder. And today we're going to address the question of why do children play sport? And actually, before we have a look at the reasons why children play sport, we're actually going to have a look at some of the common reasons why children do not play sport. So these answers were from a survey, National Sports Survey 2017, I think it was. So Phil, do you mind kindly sharing your screen and we'll just go through a few of those lists? So just having a look here at some of the reasons listed to why kids don't play sport. Looking at that first one there, feel awkward in terms of physical literacy. So physical literacy is just a posh word for physical skills. So for example, it may be hopping, skipping, jumping, throwing and catching. And actually within this survey, a lot of the children listed that if they were in a sports session and they were doing some of these activities and they weren't very competent, this was often a reason why they didn't enjoy playing that sport. So it's quite an interesting one that straight off the bat there is actually within the golf sessions that myself and Phil would encourage, we would always encourage the development of those physical skills rather than just the golf. And there's a multitude of reasons for that, but actually helping children with those skills, as we can see here, is highly beneficial because children are going to be feeling much more confident within those sessions if they are able to perform these physical skills. Jumping on to number 2, so this is a massive one. So dreading the car journey home. What does that mean? I remember it from when I was a kid, and I'm sure Phil can chat about it the same. But what this is about is as soon as your child has played sport, football, cricket, whatever it might be, there's always that time on the way home, that 10 or 15 minutes where, dad or mum might be asking questions and actually how that car journey goes is so influential for children because if they're getting in that car and actually the first question might be, oh, why did you do this today? Why didn't you do that? I can't believe you made that mistake, blah, 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 whatever that might be. A lot of negative conversation in this car journey home is something that the child is not looking forward to. And actually, they might think the week after, I don't fancy going this week. I'm not looking forward to getting in the car on the way home and dad's going to be giving me grief, whatever it might be. So that is massive, is that one. Jumping to number 3, so parents giving too much advice. Phil, what do you reckon about this one? What do you often see on the driving range?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something that's really common where you maybe have a couple of parents where they'll see like that there's some glaring things that a child's maybe not doing, let's say in a golf swing or something. And I think the old trusty for any golf aspiring golf professional amateur is you lifted your head on that one or concentrate, and you just hear it so often down the driving range. And it's not an emphasis on actually how well that child's trying or anything like that. It's more an emphasis on what they're not doing. And it derives from the parent wanting to help their child to want to get better, right? But I think anyone that's actually played golf sort of knows how hard it is to swing the golf club with sort of maybe 2 or 3 thoughts in their head, rather than sort of like often when a kid leaves the driving range when they've had like maybe a little session with their parents, where they've maybe got sort of like 7 or 8 things that they're trying to do. And it almost becomes a bit like paralysis for analysis. And all you've focused on is what they haven't done rather than what they're doing good. And therefore they sort of try and they kind of get a negative experience rather than being like, oh, that was absolutely amazing. You done that so well. You're trying really, really hard. Don't worry about it. Just have another go. Rather than saying, right, well, they've got that one wrong. What have they got to do to get it better? And I think that's the difference in sort of adult and child's mindsets, a lot of it. In the kid doesn't necessarily care if they've done it really good or really bad, or if they've kept that left arm straight, or if they've moved their head or whatever. They just want to be there to enjoy it. Whereas the adult's like, well, I kind of want to get the technique right. And I think that's something that probably parents have to think a little bit more like children with a lot of the time, and almost have this sort of play element to it rather than sort of deliberate practice sort of mindset that a lot of adults kind of like.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And really, I think a lot of this is just, you know, the crook of it is, all parents just want the best for their child. That's a complete given. But I think sometimes parents maybe don't quite appreciate at that time what might be best for that child. Let's say if we have that child at 6 years old, the parent who may be a golfer, may not be a golfer, might think, okay, right, the grip's really important. They have to get there, get the posture, get standing right, make everything look really good. But, actually, in essence, that 6-year-old child, that they're more interested about the aeroplane flying above. They're having a little scratch of the face, and they don't really care about gripping the club correctly. They don't really care about standing just like Tiger Woods. They're just in their own little world, engaging with hitting this white thing on the floor. And obviously over time, the role of the coaches and the role of the parents as well is to facilitate that development, help that journey, and probably drop in little bits of technique, because ultimately we would like the child to improve. And there's a big argument that as the child gets better, they start to enjoy it more. Okay, but we can't put an overemphasis at the start, particularly in the first experiences of golf. We don't want that child to be coming away from the driving range thinking, oh my goodness, I've just been there for half an hour and I've had my mum and my dad just shouting all this advice at me. This really wasn't fun. You think about the children's playground at school. If you've got a bunch of 6 or 7 year olds, what is happening there? It's absolute chaotic. They're just going around, having a little bit of fun, bumping into each other, chatting, all that sort of almost unstructured play. So if they then go to a driving range and all of a sudden it's this really structured environment where it's do this, do that, that just does not make a 6 or a 7 year old child tick. So I think it's really important, hopefully in this video series, that we can try and educate the parents and say, look, leave all the advice, leave the tuition to us. We're the guys who've studied this. We understand junior development. The parents have a massive role to play within that child or the junior's development, but it might not always be from the advice side. A lot of, I always remember Andy Murray, he always thanks his parents for the support. He never thanks them for coaching them. There's very few athletes who will say, I thank my mum and dad for all the coaching advice they gave me when they were younger. They always say, I just thank them for the support they've given me. And I think that's a really big thing, Phil.
I think that's
Any comments on that one?
nice point, buddy. And it's the parent first, right? Like, as you say, sort of like that car journey home, sort of like as you go down this list, sort of like a lack of motivation, too much pressure, sort of like these things. A lot of them situations can derive from the parent if it's done wrong. However, a lot of it can be flipped on its head if the parent does these things right. And I think that's why these conversations are so important, that parents do have that opportunity to upskill a little bit. I mean, as coaches, it can always come across as sort of like that you're always bashing parents a little bit for doing it all wrong. But it's only because sort of like there's a lack of understanding of it. And I think once parents are educated a little bit in these areas, they'll start to find that kid's enjoyment of the sport just goes through the roof if we start to do this right. And like 90% of parents that I deal with are absolutely fantastic. But then you've got that 10% where you sort of see that there's too much emphasis on winning. You can see sort of like that they're ready to argue with other parents if their kid loses. You can see that kid's in for a roasting on the journey home if they haven't won and stuff. And you're just like, you know what, sort of like that kid's probably not going to be playing in a couple of years. And I think a lot of this also comes from sort of like it's kind of the upbringing that Tiger Woods had, right? There are a few examples of these young prodigies where they've had a really intensive sort of upbringing and a real hunger for winning from an early age. And unfortunately, that's like what the 0.00001% of participants that sort of get to that sort of level. And
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And, if you read Tiger Woods' story, his dad was very much, militant, very, it was like an army really with Tiger Woods and how he behaved. And, obviously in the end, his father has produced the best golfer the world has ever seen. But what we have to understand is that is not the only way. And for the one Tiger Woods, there's thousands of kids that have burnt out, dropped out. We'll discuss this in another video series about reasons why kids drop out. But, I think what we've got to understand is, this is something you once said to me. If we have a 6-year-old child, we've got 20 years to get that 6-year-old child into the world's best golfer if that's what they want and that's what the parents want. We don't have to create the world's best 10-year-old. We want to, we want the world's best 26-year-old. So if you have that child at 6, you've got to think, right, hang on a minute, we've got 20 years. So if I'm there on the driving range and I am forcing information down this 6-year-old child or 7-year-old child, whatever it is, actually, in the long term, I'm not too sure that's going to play out too well, because if we want this child in the game for 20 years, they've got to absolutely love it. They've got to have that passion. They have got to have that, love, drive, determination. And that isn't going to come from pushing them away too early. If very early in that child's golfing life, they're starting to think, oh, I'm not too sure I enjoy this. My dad's telling me to do this stuff. And, they're soon just going to fall out of love of golf and go to something else because there's so many things on offer. So, I think it's really just a patience game. And I think that can be quite difficult because sometimes, particularly in this day and age, we want the results now. We've got answers at the tip of our fingertips now with modern technology, Google. And I think there's sometimes just a rush to get good. But, I think what we've got to remember is, if we want a child to play golf, well, we've got to get them, number one, enjoying it. That's then number two, going to make them coming back. And then once they start to come back, they're going to get better, but we can't skip to number 3. If we want to get to number 2, which is coming back, they have to, number one, enjoy it. And I see a rush to number 3 quite a lot. And, number 4 on that list there, lack of motivation. We could talk for ages about reasons of why children might become unmotivated, let's say. But that is a massive reason, why kids don't play sport. Whatever that reason might be, they just think, oh, I'm not motivated anymore. I'm not gonna bother going next week. So parents and coaches and golf clubs, we've got to be looking at facilitating the child's motivation. We don't want to be putting them off. So anything we're doing, we've sometimes just got to step back and look at our actions through the eyes of a child and think, well, actually, even though I might want X, Y, and Z, is that really what the child wants? Maybe not. And then number 5 there, Phil, too much pressure. And any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, pressure, obviously. What's pressure to Tiger Woods might be completely different to what my little Alfie feels as pressure, right? A lot of that will be dependent on sort of like the upbringing that child's had. But for me, sort of like it's slowly catchy monkey. We can build these things up. I've got a lot of kids that are maybe sort of like 16, 17 years old that are playing in big pressure competitions. And they have to be introduced to that pressure situation. Let's say if they want to become a really good golfer. But not all participants that play golf want to become a really good golfer. And I think sort of like that military drilling that Tiger Woods had from, say, like actually 2 years old almost thing. What's he doing 2 hours a day at the golf club from 2 years old? There was kind of a lot of pressure on Tiger Woods to get to that icon of becoming the best golfer that's ever played the game, sort of thing. That's what his dad placed as the most important thing for him. It was to actually become the best golfer in the world, not become the best person in the world. And I think that's where sort of, unfortunately, not everyone sees eye to eye. Like if I told Earl Woods, actually, it's more important that Tiger doesn't have affairs and doesn't cheat on his wife and stuff like that, and he's good with good with the media and that, rather than him becoming the world's best golfer, we probably wouldn't see eye to eye with that. And that's where sort of, I think sort of like pressure can come from, maybe having like different views of actually what is important for the child. And for me, it's always the person first. Create that well-rounded person, create that kid that loves being in that environment. From there, sort of like, I want them, as you say, sort of like that first point, they feel awkward in terms of physical literacy. We kind of want to turn them into athletes. We kind of want to give them that foundation to play anything, any games, whether that's football, rugby, cricket, or golf. Like they'll find it easy to transfer them skills, Then finally, if they want to play golf and they want to, say, specialize in golf at some point, great. Like they're probably going to end up playing in competitions. They'll start to feel sort of like pressure in a situational environment, not just pressure from parents or other competitors or the club captain and so on to sort of succeed. And a lot of that pressure comes from just wanting to win, right? Like wanting to be good at something.
I think it's important to point out at this stage, what we're talking about here. We're talking about children under the age of 12. What we're saying here is, pressure is a bad thing for me for a 7-year-old child, but pressure for a 15-year-old child playing in the national championships, that's not a bad thing. There becomes a point where pressure actually becomes a good thing, and children can strive on that pressure. But what we've got to understand is, that journey is very different in terms of where that child starts at 6 years old to where they might be at 15 years old. And what we're saying here is we don't want to heavily pressurize that 6-year-old because that's not going to fit with them. That's not going to sit with them very well.
Yeah.
10 years later, 15, 16 years old, we're not going to ram a lot of pressure down that 16-year-old's throat. But actually, if the golfing environment does become a little bit more pressurized because they've got a little bit better, they're playing in these big tournaments, then that's fine. They're at a different stage of development. By that stage, importantly, we're hoping that they're really committed to, let's say, golf at 15, 16 years old. They may have been through school, tried a few different sports and decided, you know what, golf's my baby. That's what I'm going for. So naturally, as they put themselves into the golf environment a little bit more, that pressure will come, and we can use that pressure to our advantage. But, at 6 or 7 years old, I'm not too keen myself.
Now, I
So, Phil, shall we swap over to the why kids do play sport? Do you want to run through a few of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So sort of, look, the National Sports Survey sort of suggested that there was 5 main reasons that kids play sport. And, sort of like me and Tom see this all the time. Like golf can be such a wonderful environment for kids to grow up and learning. And I had my best experiences growing up on the golf course, really, sort of like playing with me dad and sort of meeting new friends. I mean, like me and 6 of my buddies all turned professional. We was down the golf club every single day. I learned how to communicate with adults and other children. We played around the whole summer. It was brilliant. I absolutely loved it. However, it's a much different setting to 20 years ago when I started playing golf, sort of thing now. And I think a lot of it's become so structured now, hasn't it? I mean, like, I know that my dad used to drop me off at 8 o'clock in the morning and pick me up at 8 o'clock at night. And it was just like, well, what are you going to do today? I was going to get out on the golf course if I could do. I'd go and play around on the driving range. I'd smack golf balls. And for me, like, it was fun. It was unstructured. There was loads of other people that I could sort of interact with and that. And I mean, like, Tom, you've done like a really good article on fun, and I really recommend that all sort of viewers of this have a little look at it. And Tom sort of writes a little bit about fundamentally understanding needs of the child. So, Tom, why don't you sort of elaborate a little bit on what you actually see as fun?
Yeah, so we just came up with this acronym, really, that fun is actually fundamentally understanding needs, and where that comes from. There's a theory out there that says if we can satisfy 3 basic psychological needs, we're going to really help increase the intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is, for example, when somebody is motivated from the inside. So the alternate view to that might be an extrinsic motivation. So, for example, I can see that trophy and I'm going to play this tournament today because I want that trophy, because I want the prize. The intrinsic would be, I'm going to play golf today because I love it. This is my passion. And, there's nothing wrong with having intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. But I think the key component here, if we're encouraging lifelong participation in the game, there has to be a decent amount of intrinsic motivation. That child, that adult, they have to love playing golf. They can't just be playing for the prizes, for the trophies. It's kind of like going to work just for the money. A lot of people, unfortunately might say, I really hate the job, but I've got to go there. I've got to pay the bills. That's an extrinsic motivation, going for the money, and that's an unfortunate truth in life. But, just bringing that back to the fundamentally understanding needs. So the 3 basic needs were autonomy, which is basically to do with providing the child with choice. So a classic case of this would be if you have a 6, 7, 8-year-old child, allow them a choice of picking which station they're going to start on, picking the club they're going to use, picking the color of the ball, rather than just saying to that child, right, do this, do that, go there. Actually giving that child a bit of autonomy is motivational for them. Another one would be relatedness. So relatedness basically boils down to relationships and building conversation. So the more you engage a child in a conversation, ask them how they're doing, how have they got on at school, what did they have for lunch, building that relationship again is another hugely motivating factor, rather than a child just turning up, go there, young man, no conversation, just on his own, bored, her own, whoever it might be, no relationships, no conversation. That's often not very motivational for a child. And then, so the third part of this, we had autonomy, relatedness, and then success is a big part of motivation. So just looking down at number 5 there, reasons why kids play. If they're good at it, that is a reason why they play, and that can also motivate them. So this is always a tricky balancing point, because what we've already said is they don't need to get good straight away. They don't need to get good within that first hour or two. But if we leave it 5 or 6 weeks and they're not seeing that progress, that's potentially going to demotivate them. So this is that fine line between, we're not going to ram a load of information down the throat because they have to get good straight away. But over time, we're going to drip feed them little bits of information. We're going to guide them down the right road, because ultimately that's going to help them with a feeling of competence. So once we get that autonomy, we get them feeling competent, we build the relationships, that's ultimately going to motivate them intrinsically. They're going to start loving it. It's going to become the passion. And we've got a great chance of keeping them in this game for longer. So we'll do another video on the fundamentally understanding needs as part of this first series, but that there is a few little points just in a nutshell, Phil. What do we reckon there about friends then, number 2 on the list?
So friends, you've got a few in that environment. You've got loads of opportunities to make friends, right? And you've got a load of opportunities where you can drive kids out of it as well. So a big thing that I sort of see in a lot of junior programs that potentially isn't quite right is where you might have sort of like a 4-year-old and a 16-year-old, say, in the same group, and it makes everyone feel a bit uncomfortable. The 16-year-old, like their ability level, their maturity level and everything is way different to maybe what that 4-year-old is, and what their needs are is massively mismatched. And it's really tricky for them then to sort of like build that relationship and that sort of that person to go to. Whereas sort of like if we set this up right, that child's going to be around other children where they've got sort of maybe similar ability levels. They maybe got similar things to talk about. Like they might want to talk about, I don't know, Tom and Jerry, or they might want to talk, and that 16-year-old might want to talk about how their GCSEs are going and stuff. So a lot of that's really important. But then they've got their parents and they've got their coaches as well. And we all become this little support network and this little bubble for that child to actually thrive in. So I think that it's really important that we get this bit of time to become friends. You have that social element. Like if I'm going to speak to this child, I'm doing it at sort of like eye height. Like I'm talking to him in a different manner to how I'd maybe talk to another adult and so on. And make it very child friendly. And I think if they see that, if they sort of feel that you're engaging with them, or they've got that relatedness, as you say, they feel like they're making friends, and they don't just come because they're winning or losing at something. They're coming back week after week because they got that social element, which is huge. I mean, like I knew that when I was growing up playing golf, like, yeah, like I might have been upset and stuff if I didn't win, or if I come second or last or whatever. But ultimately, like I enjoyed the experience because I'll have been playing around the golf course with my best buddies. And like, I wanted to come back next week because I still wanted to talk to them and I still wanted to be in their company, So friends play a huge part in that, I think.
Yeah, no, it's absolute classic. And, I've had some parents sort of say to me in the past, I think he only wants to come so he can chat to little Johnny. And, I'm sure they're only just coming so it's a bit of a social event. And you know what? For a lot of kids, that probably is what it is. It is a bit of a social event with golf, and that doesn't mean that, they're not learning golf and they're only chatting to their mates. Of course they're learning golf at the same time as chatting to their mates, but that social factor is massive for kids, and it's even for adults as well. How many guys, girls, they go to the weekend competition to catch up with the buddies from the week and play a little bit of golf. And it's not just all about golf for adults, it's about that social environment, and that's absolutely critical for kids as well. So
Love that.
massive there, really. A reason that they play sport is because their friends play sport as well. And just going into number 3 there, so fit in, I think this, no one in any situation, adult or child, if they're feeling like they're excluded from a particular social environment, that's not going to feel nice for anyone. And that's why we try and encourage those relationships, making friends, fitting in, talking to each other. That's massive for a child. And feels good. What does that mean? Well, ultimately what feels good for a 6-year-old is going to be different to a 16-year-old. But I think the emphasis on that point is, we want children smiling. So whatever we're doing, parents, coaches, within that environment of that driving range, golf course, whatever it is, what we are doing, is that going to make the child smile, or is that going to make the child, not smile? So what information are we giving them? What are we saying to them? That's really important. We've always got to think, hang on a minute, we're trying to make them feel good. And that doesn't mean giving false praise. And, if they hit a really bad shot, always say, oh, great shot, because you know what? This whole idea of praise is a tricky one. Children aren't stupid. If they're missing the ball and you keep on saying, oh, great try, good shot, and there's too much positive encouragement, they're going to be thinking, hang on a minute, this isn't good. Why is this teacher or coach telling me this is good? So it's totally not about giving false praise. And again, it's finding that balance between false praise and constructive criticism. But absolutely, we've got to be able to encourage children to feel good, because that's one of the reasons they play sport, Phil.
Absolutely, buddy. And, like, I think it's very closely tied to that good at it, right? Sort of, as you say, children aren't stupid. They know that if they're missing that ball, like, that's not really the aim of the game with it. So that's where you have to kind of be creative as a parent and as a coach to sort of make it appropriate, right? So, if your 5-year-old hasn't got any striking skills because they've never picked up a baseball bat or a tennis racket or a golf club, like, it's really tricky then to go and make contact with a ball and smash it 50 yards, whereas if Tiger Woods has had 3 years of doing that from 2 years old through to 5 years old, it kind of looks easy for him. And then that almost becomes a bit demotivating for that 5-year-old that's trying it for the first time, and that doesn't feel good. So I think if you start that child off maybe with like something that's quite easy, like get them hitting a ball and just striking an object with, say, like a tennis racket, with something, or like a football or something like that, they're going to start to feel good about it because they're starting to achieve what the aim of the game was. And then start to sort of like make it more appropriate, and then it gets a little bit harder and harder and harder as we go along. So they see that clear progress. They can see that they're getting better at it, but they haven't started off necessarily at that end goal trying to emulate Tiger Woods at 5 years old, that's maybe got 3 years of experience, and his ability level was maybe way higher than what that beginner sort of was. What would you say to that, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just going back to those 3 psychological needs of one of them was competence and success, that looks different for a 5-year-old than a 10-year-old. But the point is, as you've just said there, if we have a 5-year-old, we want that 5-year-old to experience some sort of success. So that game might just be hit a tennis ball, it might be hit the ground, whatever that might be, doesn't really matter. It has to be appropriate for that child in that time. And we can make a 5-year-old feel the same feeling of success as a 10-year-old. The task might be different, but they still get that feeling of success. And I think that's really how we've got to go through this, setting different challenges, appropriate challenges at different ages to help those children get that feeling of success.
Ability, well, as you say, sort of like Tiger Woods at 5 years old maybe had the ability of, say, like a 10-year-old as well, and he can actually become quite demotivated if you just keep him at that 5-year-old's age group, but actually his ability level is way higher as well. And I think it's important that you get a balance of them, and it's not easy to do, especially when you've got groups of children. I mean, like, you've got groups of 150 children coming for a week. You've got to try and strike that balance, right, where you could have sort of like a 6-year-old that is the next Tiger Woods and his ability level is amazing, and then you've got little Johnny, who it's his first week of playing, who's 6 years old and his ability level is way down here. How do you sort of balance that act, Tom?
Well, I think basically it's the art of the coach, isn't it? If you have kids in a group that are of different ability levels, you've got to create a game that has got slightly different boundaries. You know, for one kid, it might be right, land the ball within that 10-yard area. For another child, it might be land the ball within that 5-yard area. And I think just bringing this back to parents, you know, I think the big thing here on the parents is, you know, your 6 or 7-year-old, whatever it might be, it's often very difficult to compare them directly to another 6 or 7-year-old. You know, a good example of this is distance. You know, we can't always say, hang on a minute, little Jesse, you know, you're not hitting it as far as little Jody. Hang on a minute, little Jody might be a little bit more mature. She might be a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. So it's a very difficult situation for parents sometimes when they're comparing children. You know, try not to compare your child to one of their peers, you know.
Love that. I think that's
Yeah.
so important, and it's so common. And golf actually does give us quite a nice surrounding, in that it's quite an individual sport, and it's hard not to compare yourself to someone else in it. But actually, golf sort of gives you a nice leveler in a handicap system, right? Like, everyone can play off the same sort of level, whether, like, you know, sort of like I'm a scratch handicapper and I've got a 30 handicapper. Doesn't matter, we're still playing together, and we're just playing to our abilities, rather than being like, well, that 30 handicapper is not as good as me, a scratch handicapper, so he shouldn't be playing. Like, it's not about that, is it?
Absolutely. You know, it's a complicated journey, you know, and it's everyone's on their own journey. We're not on the same journey. Everyone's at different stages, and it's just understanding those different stages. So, Phil, let's crack it over to the next slide. This is a big one, isn't it? So, in those 5 reasons from that survey, you know, winning wasn't a primary reason for kids playing sport. And, you know, this is pretty mad, isn't it, really, to try and get your head around sometimes. It's like, what do you mean, like, winning wasn't important? Well, actually, that was a survey done for under 12s, and that's what they said, you know, and hopefully we went through those 5 reasons, and hopefully now we've got a bit of an understanding. Actually, you know what, in those early years, those initial experiences of a football, cricket, whatever it might be, it isn't really about the winning for the child. It's more about the making friends, having fun, feeling good, all that stuff we've listed. So the real critical takeaway here, I think, for the parents is, let's not overemphasize the winning too much too early. Okay. Yeah. Now, hang on a minute. Winning.
It's not saying that it's not going to come at some point. Like,
exactly.
You know, sort of like, yeah, it's lovely for Tiger Woods to be standing with a green jacket on his back, sort of thing. But first things first, he's got to create that love of the game, and that's got to be the first and foremost thing for parents. Like, when you are introducing your child to the game, try and make it that you're setting them up for a lifetime in the game, because I think it's 1 in 327,000 people that play golf make it onto the tour. So a lot, like, you're not going to make it a lot of the time, okay? So, but if we're setting them up for a lifetime in the game, and ultimately, yeah, it'd be great to have the next Tiger Woods, wouldn't it? That sort of does win 15 majors or whatever, but it shouldn't be your big driver. The primary reason should be that that kid loves the game of golf, rather than that they've just won or lost, that they've got that trophy and that's a big pat on the back, or that they've lost it, so that's a kick up the jacksie.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, you know, this winning thing, you know, we shouldn't shy away from the fact that, you know, a lot of kids do want to win, you know, and you might have a little 8, 9-year-old kid, and he's playing in his little game, whatever, and he's like, who's won, you know, the points and all that sort of stuff. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with kids wanting to win. You know, there's nothing wrong with the parents wanting the kids to win. But I think it's getting the balance right between, don't overemphasize the winning. You know, that winning isn't the most important thing for that young child. as we get older and as we develop, it might really become about winning. But actually, at the very early years, it's not a primary reason. It shouldn't be overemphasized. And actually, just a little side note here is when the child starts to play because they feel like they have to win, that's where the pressure starts to build up. If that child is thinking, oh my goodness, I've got to win, I'm worried what dad's going to say to me if I don't win. All of a sudden, the reason that child is playing is nothing to do with having fun, having friends. He's then playing to try and keep dad happy. And he's worried about dad not being happy. And all the side stuff that comes with that, ultimately, it's pressure. And what was it? Pressure is one of the reasons why kids don't play sports. So we've got to be careful, haven't we, with this winning idea? We don't want to overemphasize it. We don't want to generate too much pressure, because then we're really down a slippy slope. But I think, for me, what I would often say to parents and other coaches and children is actually, it's just about actually learning to lose as much as learning to win. There's nothing wrong with wanting to win, but if we don't win, it's how do we accept it? How do we move on? Understand that we can't win all the time. Don't make it all about winning, and try and just see the bigger picture with it, really.
Yeah. And Tom, I think that's a really nice thing, sort of like if your child does win early, say like they go and play in, I don't know, a Rob Rock Tour event or a junior golf tour or something like that, and they win, they kind of almost get put on this pedestal as well, right? They're kind of like, right, well, I'm good at this thing. And the parents like, oh yeah, little Jimmy's won the Rob Rock Junior Golf Tour. They've kind of only got one way to go from there as well. Like you're setting them up for a bit of failure with that as well, which is a tricky thing.
Yeah, look, I think that's I think that's one for another video there. But sometimes winning too much too early can actually be a bad thing, for reasons, as you've said there, that perceived expectation. But I think that wraps it up there for that video, Phil. So just a bit of a summary there for the parents listening. I think importantly, we have to never lose sight of why children decide to play sport. Why did they decide to do it in the beginning? When that 6-year-old child rocks up to that golf driving range, football, wherever it might be, why are they doing that? They're doing it because they want to have fun. They want to make friends. They want to feel good. They want to be good at it. They're not doing it for some of the reasons that we might commonly think. And let's always, have a side eye on those reasons and make sure that when we're in that environment with that child, our actions are actually suiting those reasons, and we're not putting too much pressure on them. We're not overemphasizing the winning. We're not, encouraging that they dread that car journey home. And hopefully, just if we can try and see this bigger picture and be patient, we don't have to rush success and rush getting good. As Phil said there, we're trying to develop a lifelong passion and a lifelong love. Have you any closing words there, Phil?
It's not necessarily about success either, is it? It's like, sort of like my dad played golf and he was rubbish at it. And he had one hole in one and that was his basically only success, but he loved going to golf every single week, loved seeing his mates and that. So I think that emphasis so early on about winning, about success, and at any point about success, it doesn't necessarily need to be about that. As I say, 1 in 327,000 people might make it on tour. It's actually majority of people aren't going to have what's perceived as sort of like ultimate success at golf, making it onto these higher echelons of it. But so, sort of like try and find other successes with it, being able to get out there at the weekend rather than go into ASDA, and that might be deemed as a success for average Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for your time, guys. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. There we go.
Finished. Don't delete it.